I get this question all the time. What is the fear of intimacy? Have you been in a situation where you met somebody, everything's going great, and then he leaves for a job assignment to a different city for a couple of weeks, he comes back, but he doesn't call you. Or he leaves and you thought that the connection was so strong, but he just decides not to call you. Or perhaps a situation where you meet somebody, he's amazing, he gets sick with the flu, and after a week he doesn't want to call you, or he just forgets to call you, and the relationship falls apart. Lots of relationships would have been created, lots of relationships would have sustained a lot longer if there was a level of intimacy that's deeper. Most men, this is not just gay men, most men in general lack the ability to develop intimacy. And fear of intimacy is not the fear of creating intimacy. It's actually a fear of sharing. So it's actually a lot simpler than you thought. Sharing is what creates intimacy. So let's talk about several types of sharing that can allow you to connect really deeply, almost seduce somebody, and create a relationship that is so deep so that whenever there's a challenge, whenever you have to go out of town, so you're not worried that this relationship will fall apart, especially if it is at the beginning stages. Let me share with you some ideas for how to develop intimacy with another man. There are two parts. One is disclosure, one is vulnerability. It's actually not that complicated, but we sometimes have emotional blockages, or we have certain belief systems about sharing that prevents us from really giving ourselves to another person and develop intimacy. So disclosure and vulnerability is looking at yourself and identifying your feelings, identifying your worries, identifying your weaknesses, and actually sharing it with another person. Disclosure usually focuses on just normal things that you share about your past, about your present, about your future. But then intimacy will develop because you take disclosure to the next level by introducing vulnerability. Vulnerability is talking about your weaknesses, talking about your feelings, deep feelings, feelings of uncertainty, feelings of anxiousness, feelings of depression, feelings of being weak. When you share that with another person, they look at you and they see themselves in you. That's why the connection is so deep. They see themselves in the words that you share with them. And essentially, the more stories you tell them about yourself that are not perfect, that are not idealistic, that are not based on strength, the more empathy develops, the more understanding develops, and the more humility is introduced into the relationship. Remember, people cannot connect on the basis of strength. You are never going to have a good quality relationship with another person just on the basis of strength. So you want to always practice sharing and disclosing ideas and issues about your life that are not all that perfect, that are not all that glamorized, so that another person can relate to them. The world is a tough place out there, and I'm sure you can agree with that. The world is almost like this wild, wild west, and the world of dating and relationships is even more complex. So the more you share, the more you disclose about your previous partners, about how you tried to make things work but they didn't work, the more you share about your personality, how sometimes it's amazing and sometimes it gets you into trouble, the more the other person can look you in the eye and say, okay, you're real, you are real, as opposed to being fake, plasticky, and glamorized and commercialized. Let me give you an example of how lack of intimacy actually broke apart a good relationship. I recently had a call with a client who said to me, Paul, several years ago I had this amazing relationship that lasted for 7 years. And I thought, wow, amazing relationship for 7 years, that's great, tell me more. And he says, we had the same interests, we worked in the same industry, we traveled the world, we had great sex. And so I say, why did it end? And he said, well, one time I was asked to leave the country for several months, and he just didn't like that, and the relationship ended. And I thought, there's a big piece that's missing here. There's something missing. It doesn't make sense. 7 years together, you travel together, you have the same interests, you work in the same industry, you have great sex. Why would a relationship like that end? And I believe the answer was in the lack or in the absence or lack of intimacy. And the more I dug, the more I found out I learned that they lived separately, and I also asked about this person's father, that his father was this macho man, this military style, very authoritarian kind of business person. And so of course, if that's your father, if that was his father, that he would have the inability to share his feelings. He would always want to be strong, and he was a successful person. So of course, in a relationship, he was trying to connect with this person on the basis of accomplishment, on the basis of ambition, on the basis of being strong and tough and successful. I believe there is time that we definitely want to show ourselves and our abilities and present that to our lovers, our partners. But that's not going to connect us deeply. What will connect us is the struggles and the intimacy that will develop between you and your lover. The intimacy will rely on the constant sharing of the struggles, the insecurities, the worries about the future, even some inner conflicts, existential crises. That's what really connects people together. When you talk about the concept of seduction and how it relates to intimacy, seduction is all about intimacy. Physical attraction is based on simply physical attraction. You see the body of the person, you're attracted to that. But imagine you tell another person intimate stories about your past, stories that show vulnerability, stories that show a certain journey, certain struggle that you pushed through, that you suffered, but you won anyway later. That story I would attach to the already present attraction for your body, for your physical body. And that's how seduction develops. The person then attaches your stories and the meaning of those stories to what they want from their life. And the connection becomes really deep, really intertwined, really complex. The connection becomes not just to the person's body, but to all the stories, all the stories of suffering, all the stories of also victory that the person was willing to share with with his partner. So intimacy is very crucial. Intimacy is what will help you survive a relationship where there is some promiscuity, where there's betrayal, where there's some big disappointment. Every relationship at some point will be tested. My relationships have been tested. Many have fallen apart simply because of lack of that intimacy. And so for you, the same thing will happen. If you have intimacy, if you have that deep sharing, this deep vulnerability, then you will be more likely to have that relationship for much longer than when you're just superficial about your sharing, when you're superficial about your communication with the person that you were living with, the person that you're dating. I'm sure you have seen couples that have been together for 10 years, 15 years, then the relationship ends and they tell you stories about why it ended. And sometimes they say, well, you know what, after 15 years of being with this man, I never really knew who he was. You would imagine that after 15 years, I kind of knew who he was, but I never did. And so stories like that prove that lack of intimacy is actually very common in relationships, not just gay relationships, but all kinds of relationships whenever we have a man, because we know that women are more likely to share. And actually, they crave that intimacy. Women share that emotional connection. Men also need that. And when you have two men together, it will become a challenge to create that intimacy. But it's not the fear of intimacy that stops people. It's essentially the fear of sharing, because people think that when you share your weaknesses, that you are actually a weak person. So the biggest challenge you're going to be facing in terms of intimacy is the assumption or the belief that when you share something bad about yourself, something weak, something imperfect about yourself, that the other person will break up with you, that the other person will reject you. And it actually works the other way around. The more you share, the more they fall in love with you. So from today on, I invite you to develop greater level of courage to share, greater level of courage to be vulnerable with your man. You may have parents that have been very strict, that have been very macho-like, and for you it may be more difficult to share your emotions with another person. So baby step at a time, identify some areas of your life that you are not proud of and share that one person at a time. And I bet you will discover that the more you do it, the deeper connections you have and the deeper intimacy levels you have with your friendships and also with your romantic partners. And that will ensure that your relationships will survive many tests that otherwise would have created a breakup. So I hope this has been very helpful for you. I love sharing this information with you. I would love to share even more. If you have a chance to visit my website, please do so. And until I talk to you next time, as always, go out there, think big, stay present, and be a leader in your life today. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.